In a field in rural South Carolina, there are 2 nuclear reactors that have never produced a single watt of electricity. They are almost finished. The concrete is poured, the steel is up, and they will never ever switch on. Getting to that point cost about $9 billion. Nobody stole that money in a suitcase. It was collected legally a few dollars at a time from ordinary people power bills. And by the time the whole thing was abandoned, the customers who paid for it had gotten exactly nothing. While the people who ran it walked away with bonuses, a buyout, and eventually some very light prison sentences. This is not a story about a nuclear plant that failed. The engineering barely got the chance to fail. This is a story about a law that made failure profitable, because at VC Summer the money was never really at risk. Not the company money, anyway, yours. Let's go back to the beginning, when this looked like the future. In the late 2000s, South Carolina had a plan to build 2 brand new reactors, a design called the AP1000 at the existing VC Summer nuclear station near Jenkinsville. 2 utilities would own them together, a company called sce&g, the subsidiary of a larger firm named SCANA, holding 55%, and a state-owned utility called Santee Cooper, holding the other 45%. On paper, it was a triumph in waiting, clean power for decades. Thousands of construction jobs, a signature project for a state that wanted to lead America's nuclear comeback. Everyone was aligned, everyone was excited, and to make it all happen, the state legislature handed the utility a gift. A gift so quietly powerful that almost nobody outside the energy industry understood what it actually did. The gift was a 2007 state law called the Base Load Review Act. Now, normally when a company builds something huge, it takes on the risk. It borrows the money, it eats the interest, and it only gets paid back once the thing is finished and actually working. If the project runs over budget, that's the company's problem. That's how risk is supposed to work. The Base Load Review Act flipped that upside down. It let sce&g charge its customers for the cost of building the reactors while they were still being built. Not after. During. Every year, the utility could go to regulators, report its construction spending, and raise everyone's rates to cover the financing. So the customers became the bank, except a bank gets paid interest for taking a risk. These customers got a higher power bill and a promise. Between 2009 and 2016, sce&g raised its rates 9 separate times under this law. By the end, roughly 18% of a customer's bill was going toward these 2 reactors, and customers had paid more than $1.1 billion just in financing costs for reactors that were still nowhere near done. Here's the part that turns a bad idea into a dangerous one. Think about what that law did to the utilities' incentives. If the customers are paying for the construction as it happens, then a cost overrun isn't a threat to the company, it's the opposite. The more the project costs, the more the utility gets to collect, and the law guaranteed it a rate of return on that spending, a return that at one point ran as high as 11%. In front of state legislators in 2016, the head of the state's small business chamber said it plainly. There was, he testified, no incentive for the utility to avoid cost overruns and delays because it didn't carry the risk. In fact, there was a perverse incentive to let costs climb, because every extra dollar spent was another dollar the company earned a return on. Sit with that. The one party running the project was the one party that couldn't really lose. The customers carried the risk by law. The company carried the upside by law. That is the whole story in one sentence, and everything that follows is just the consequences. Now, defenders of the project will say, wait, there was protection. There was a fixed price contract, and that's true. The reactors were being built by Westinghouse, the legendary American nuclear company, under a fixed price deal. The idea of fixed price is simple. If the project goes over budget, the contractor eats the difference, not the owners. And behind Westinghouse stood its parent company, the Japanese giant Toshiba, which had signed a guarantee to cover Westinghouse's obligations, capped at just over $2 billion. So on the surface, the risk looked handled. The customers paid the financing, but a blown budget was Westinghouse's problem. backstopped by Toshiba. What could go wrong? The answer is the thing that always goes wrong with a guarantee. A guarantee is only as strong as the company making it. And Westinghouse was about to demonstrate exactly how a fixed price contract protects nobody when the fixed price is more than the contractor can survive. Because the reactors were a mess. The AP1000 was a new design, and building it turned into a grinding disaster of delays, rework, and ballooning costs. And in February 2016, the owners got a document that told them in detail how bad it really was. It was an assessment by the engineering firm Bechtel, and it laid out the debilitating problems with the construction, the schedule, the management, the sheer scale of what was still wrong. That report existed. The people at the top had it, and it was kept quiet for about a year, only surfacing publicly in 2017 when the governor forced it out. Why does that timing matter so much? Because of a deadline. To qualify for more than $1 billion in federal tax credits, as much as $2.2 billion by one accounting, the reactors had to be finished and running by the first day of 2021. By 2016, the people holding the Bechtel report had very good reason to believe that deadline was already gone. And this is where a business failure becomes a crime. According to federal prosecutors, the executives running the project knew the reactors would not be finished in time to earn those tax credits, and they hid that from the regulators. They kept telling the state the project was on track. Because if they admitted the truth, the tax credits were at risk and the rate increases might stop. And the rate increases were the whole game. So they kept the money flowing by keeping the regulators and the customers in the dark. Let me be precise because it matters. This isn't speculation, and it isn't just my read of it. 4 executives were later criminally convicted over this. The head of SCANA, Kevin Marsh, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud. The prosecutor's language was blunt. An $11 billion nuclear ghost town paid for by investors and customers sitting vacant. This was a documented, prosecuted fraud, not a difference of opinion. The thing about hiding a fire is that the fire keeps burning. In March 2017, the pressure broke through in a way no cover-up could contain. Westinghouse, the contractor, the company whose fixed price contract was supposed to protect everyone, filed for bankruptcy. The cost of finishing those reactors had helped sink a company that had been building nuclear plants for generations. And the moment Westinghouse went down, the fixed price guarantee turned into what it always really was, a claim in a bankruptcy and a capped promise from a parent company. In July 2017, the owners gave up. They abandoned the project. Here is the number that should stay with you. At the point they walked away, the project was reportedly about 63% complete. $9 billion spent. Reactors 2/3 built and then nothing. 2 of the most expensive unfinished buildings in American history, left to rust in a field. So let's do what this channel always does. Let's follow the money and ask the only question that matters. When the smoke cleared, who actually lost and who walked away fine? Start with the customers. They had paid billions during construction and they got nothing. No power, no reactors, no refund of the years of higher bills. They had been the bank and the loan had defaulted and there was no deposit insurance. Now the shareholders of SCANA, the company at the center of the fraud, you'd expect them to be wiped out. They were not. In early 2018, the energy giant Dominion swooped in and bought SCANA. SCANA's shareholders received Dominion stock at a premium of roughly 1/3, and by some measures over 40% above where the stock had been trading. The total deal was valued at around $14.5 billion including debt. The company that ran the fiasco was not destroyed. It was acquired at a markup, and Westinghouse, it had already collected years of payments for the construction it did complete. When it collapsed, Toshiba sold it off to a private equity firm for $4.6 billion. It changed hands. It survived. It is today still one of the biggest names in nuclear power on Earth. Now, there was a reckoning. It was just a strangely gentle one. Those 4 executives went to prison, but look at the sentences. The CEO, Kevin Marsh, got 2 years and a $5 million penalty. The others got 15 months, 6 months of home detention, and for the final man, sentenced in late 2024, 1 year. 4 convictions for a $9 billion collapse built on hiding the truth from regulators, and the harshest sentence was 2 years. On the corporate side, the Securities and Exchange Commission charged that shareholders had been deceived and, in its words, robbed of millions. The settlement for that? A $25 million penalty, which Dominion paid on Scanner's behalf. $25 million against $9 billion spent, and the customers did eventually get something. As part of the Dominion takeover, sce&g customers were promised about $2 billion in refunds and restitution, spread out over 20 years, plus a cash payment that came to around $1,000 for the average household. It sounds like a lot until you remember it's a partial refund, paid slowly for money that was taken to build nothing. And the bill did not actually close. Remember the other owner, the state-owned utility Santee Cooper? It held 45% of the project, and it had borrowed heavily to do it. Years later, in 2024, Santee Cooper was still carrying roughly $3.6 billion in debt from its share of the reactors that never ran. The state seriously considered selling the whole utility off to escape the hole, at one point lining up a buyer before deciding to keep it. So think about the full shape of it. The customers of both utilities paid during construction. The customers of one utility are refunding slowly over 20 years. And the customers and public behind the state-owned utility are still standing under billions in debt for the same empty reactors. The people who bore the risk were, from the first day to the last, the ones the law said would bear it. The public. Meanwhile, the shareholders got bought out at a premium. The contractor was sold and survived, and the executives are already out of prison. Which brings us to now, and to the reason this story suddenly matters again. In 2025 and 2026, nuclear power is having a comeback. Artificial intelligence is devouring electricity, data centers need enormous, steady power, and suddenly everyone wants reactors again. And in South Carolina, people have started asking an almost unbelievable question. Should we go back and finish VC summer? By late 2024, an advisory group was openly floating a possible restart of the very reactors that were abandoned. Maybe that's a good idea. The steel is already there. But before anyone signs the next set of papers, it is worth remembering exactly how the first version failed. It didn't fail because nuclear power is impossible. It failed because someone wrote a law that let a company spend other people's money with no real downside, and then, when the truth got inconvenient, hid it. The reactors were never the risky part, the incentives were. And the thing to watch for every single time is simple. When you're told a giant project is guaranteed, always ask the same question these South Carolina customers should have asked in 2007. Guaranteed by whom? And who pays if the guarantee turns out to be worth nothing? Because at VC Summer the answer was the same as it always is. The people who never got a vote and never got a what.